Welcome to Fair Bites. Fair Bites is a global nonprofit advancing AI ethics education through bite-sized content, resources, and community. I'm Catherine. I take she, her pronouns, and I'm the founder and director of Fair Bites.
Hello, everyone. I'm Elisée, and I go by he, him, and I'm the Director of Technology at Fairbytes.
In today's episode, we'll be talking to Shalaleh Rismani. Shalaleh is currently the co-director and a design researcher at the Open Robotics Institute, which is a Canadian think tank investigating the ethical and social implications of AI and robotics. She is also pursuing her PhD in electrical and computer engineering at McGill University, where she is a member of the Responsible Autonomy and Intelligent Systems Ethics Lab, researching how to measure and evaluate the adherence of AI systems to AI ethics principles.
Hi. So the first question we have is, can you talk a little bit about your background, how you got started into AI and robotics, and
Absolutely.
maybe about yourself?
All right. Yes, my background is in engineering. So I studied mechanical engineering, specialized in mechatronics, in my undergraduate program at University of British Columbia. And mechatronics at that time was quite, I would say, a new field. And I loved it because it got to sort of combine the mechanical, the electrical, computer science. You got to sort of do everything. And at the time I saw a presentation by Dr. Elizabeth Croft focusing on human-robot interaction and what that means and how we can actually establish good collaboration between robotic systems and humans. And I got really interested in that line of research. So I did a bunch of undergraduate research sort of internships in that field. And then that basically sparked my interest in the field of robot ethics. And particularly in my undergraduate program, we learned how to build robotic systems, but we didn't really ask question of why we are building these systems and how they will impact people in positive or negative ways. And that was frustrating for me. So that frustration led to my involvement in Open Robotics Initiative at that time, which in 2013. And that's how I sort of started in this field and sort of dabbled in different aspects. I can tell you more about those later.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, let's lead right in. So what are you currently working on in your research and work?
Yeah. So the field of robot ethics and AI ethics have evolved quite a bit since when I first got exposed to it in 2012 and 2013. So in 2000, I guess the term roboethics was coined in 2008, so not so long ago. And the phrase AI ethics is much newer, actually. I would say maybe 5 or 6 years old, and the conferences in the field are also 5 or 6 years old. So the question that I'm looking at right now might seem sort of simple or preliminary in other fields that are more established, but it's something that we are looking at in this field still. And the idea is that we are talking about the need and the desire to build AI systems that are fair, that are transparent, that are ethical, but we don't actually really know how to measure what that means in any sort of concrete ways. So if some machine learning engineer is going to actually start, building these systems, what standards, what regulations should they abide by? There are some standards that are in development, but there isn't really anything out there that people actually predominantly agree on or follow. So my research is particularly looking at how we are measuring these currently and how we should be measuring them. So I'm still, I guess, relatively early in my PhD process. So in that, I'm in that sort of, my efforts are in trying to answer those questions.
Yeah, that's really incredible. And especially coming from a design perspective is really valuable to all of us who are wanting to develop and research and build these tools. I guess going back to your engineering and robotics background, traditional engineering and robotics programs don't often teach ethical and societal issues in their classes or consider them in their research. Thankfully, that trend is changing more and more nowadays. But for you personally, when did you start thinking about these, and when did ethical principles and social implications start to come into play for your research and studies?
Right. So I guess for me, that was part of my reasoning to go to engineering in the first place. So I decided later in high school that I wanted to go into engineering because engineers get to solve societal problems, they get to solve problems. And for me, and sort of my first introduction to engineering and design was when I was part of this program called Vale, where we had to identify a problem under the theme of zero waste and address that through a design. And to me, that was fascinating to be able to address, a societal issue partially through technology. And so for me, I guess societal issues and ethical issues were always inherently part of engineering, or inherently interested me in engineering. But then as I went in, as you've mentioned, I went into my engineering program, I realized that's not the dominant, I guess, perspective at the time towards, engineering. It was more like focused on technical solutions and whatnot. And I guess I got lucky that I was one of the first people who could take this course called Global Engineering at UBC, where we got to get exposed to some of these issues a little bit more hands-on. So we learned about concepts of human-centered design, service design, how, understanding impact assessments and understanding stakeholders when you are looking at technologies and understanding context. So those ideas came through that global engineering course, and so more formally. So that was I guess, my personal interest and ideas always, involved ethical and social issues, but more formally, I got exposed to them in that particular course. And then after that, I guess a lot of my own personal readings and sort of interest in the area helped me sort of grow and learn more about it.
Yeah, that's an amazing journey, and love how hearing about your interests come to play with your work.
Thank you.
Thanks. The next question I have is, what are your thoughts on future trends and new challenges within tech and the AI ethics industry?
The new trends. Interesting question. I would say that currently the AI industry is facing the huge challenge of actually successfully implementing AI systems. And there's challenges at different levels. So there's actually very much a technical challenge in the sense that a lot of companies are not necessarily prepared to actually deploy AI systems. So by prepared, I mean they do not necessarily have the right data infrastructures and systems in place to be able to actually develop and deploy an ML, like a machine learning model. So in order to do that, we need to sort of practice that basically as an industry. We have to keep practicing what is a good way, what's a good process of actually implementing an AI system and machine learning system in practice, right? And so that there are inherent technical challenges to that, a bit how you are protecting your data, with how you are shaping your data, with who has access to that data, and how secure is your data. There's those technical challenges. And then also other technical challenges with deploying your model and how efficient is your model. Can it actually run with the limited computation powers that most companies will have, and so on and so forth. But then, so that's the technical, but the actual, there's also very much, societal challenges that will come through as well. So how will these devices interact with people? How will they impact people? Will people use them in the long run? How will we, they will likely fail at some point. Every device will fail at some point. What should we do when they fail? How should they act? All of these things. So I think there are, and I recognize that people, many people also recognize these issues and are actively working on it. So, but I would say those are the two main trends in this field.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's really valuable insights. And on that topic, I guess, from your research and your experiences too, do you have any recommendations or advice for current or future roboticists, researchers, developers in industry and academia, like anyone tangentially related on how to better design responsible technology?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I would say, I mean, when we're looking at design, one of the things that has been practiced for many decades and is practiced less, I would say, when it comes to designing AI systems and robotics, is understanding who your stakeholders are and understanding the values that your particular set of stakeholders and the particular society you're dealing with has. So, for example, if you're designing something in Canada, in Vancouver, that's going to be different than designing for Indigenous communities in Canada. So because they inherently have very different set of values, people living in Vancouver, even within the same country, different communities will have very different set of values about how they want to bring an automated system into their lives or not bring it into their lives. So I would say, this what we call human-centered design, or another approach, value sensitive design, these are very much fundamental design theories that I think that have been applied for decades now in other fields actually, but have not been applied as much for AI system development or for robotics development. And I definitely think there's room to learn from those and bring those in. So basic things like, who are you designing for and how's it going to impact them, and what is the culture that you're designing for? Being aware of that, I think, will add a lot of depth. And then in order to actually be able to then go further, you have to be open to talk to people from those groups that are not you, right? So a lot of the times as a machine learning engineer, you are behind a computer, you're not really affected by the systems that you're actually designing, but the systems that you are designing will have the possibility to affect thousands of people, especially at the scale that machine learning systems are generally launched at. So, you have to sort of step out of your zone and try to walk into other people's shoes. And I understand that's very much difficult, but it is a sort of the part of the responsibility of being a designer. And obviously, you don't have to do that alone. I think it helps to have, the leadership within your company that helps you get access to those types of resources. And so basically asking who's involved, how are they impacted, and then talking to them would be sort of my primary suggestions. But again, I want to say that's not really novel. That has been done in some fields for many, many years.
Thank you. Another one I have is, in a perfect world, right? How would you want to see AI ethics included in like the systems for the future?
In a perfect world, I would say that I see that AI ethics, or AI the field of AI and AI systems, has to be regulated in order for us to build systems that work sort of well over and over again, and not just once or twice. So as much as there is this sentiment within the computer science community and within the ML practitioner community that regulations, or within the startup community, that regulations are hindering innovation. But I also think they make it possible for you to actually keep your innovation and keep using it. So, and I disagree with the sentiment that it actually hinders innovation. I think innovation can exist in many spaces. Just because you have a particular regulation that says, you need to collect your data in a certain way, does not mean that your innovation as a company, innovation is hindered, right? You can be innovative under many constraints. So I do think that the field has to be regulated. So I think in the long run, but in the meantime, I would say what would be ideal is that everybody who is designing these systems has a sense of ask these questions for themselves as they're designing it, right? So it's not that just one person in a company is the person who's going to drive AI ethics forward. That's not going to really ever work. You want everybody to be or majority of the people to be asking these questions, so that we actually move it move forward in a positive direction.
Yeah, thank you very much. That was a good explanation.
Yeah, very interesting hearing about your ideal world and in working towards there. Our final question that we ask all our speakers is even though this is a very evolving and dynamic space in many aspects, a conversation about AI or taking control of AI and technology, it has not really reached a large segment of internet users and technology users yet. And so we wanted to ask your opinion on how we can start this conversation with our friends, coworkers, people in our circles, anyone beyond. How can we do our part in promoting the conversation and getting it started on ethical and responsible AI?
That's a great question. I think you are, pointing to a very much present problem, and that people are not necessarily engaged in this conversation, even though they are being impacted by it. So, I mean, the one simple way I like to think about it, or I like to talk to my friends about it, is that, how do you spend your time? And who gets to direct your time, right? So, for example, if you use any of the social media apps, you're automatically directed by a machine learning system to see certain things over others. And I would just ask people, like, pay attention next time. What is being shown to you and what are you being directed to see? And that's how you're spending maybe an hour of your day is being directed by a machine learning system. And it's being directed based on how it categorized you as a person with regards to everybody else that's using that system, right? So I think that's a huge one. That's a huge sort of question for me that I think gets people thinking. Now so once they get thinking, they start asking questions. So how is it directing me, and why is it directing me? And then you can get into the nitty-gritty details of, okay, it's, first of all, you actually cannot find a lot of information about why it's directing you. So that's an inherent problem in of itself. Like, you don't necessarily, in order to get information from many of these social media platforms about how their algorithm works, like as a user, and why they're being directed in a certain way, it's very inaccessible for them to get that type of information. So that's a huge flag, right? But then maybe you can expose them to other types of social media platforms that have a different model from, the more conventional ones, and the ones that are trying to be a little bit more democratic and privacy preserving, and give them the choice of saying, hey, maybe you want to look into this one and use this one versus the other one. Not necessarily trying to advocate for one, and I'm not really necessarily advocating for one either, but just saying that you have options, as to choose. So that's one line of thinking that I like to sort of go at it. I mean, if you want to sort of go at other levels, then you can ask about, like, okay, what is your municipal government policy on autonomous vehicles? Does anybody that uses semi-autonomous vehicles, right? And are they using any of their automation features? Like, are they using the automated braking feature? Are they using the blind spot feature? How's that helping them or not helping them? That's another sort of line of conversation they can have. But I think the easiest one for me with younger individuals is asking about social media platforms. And then if you want to sort of talk another field, I think another easy one is autonomous cars.
Yeah, thank you so much. I love how you phrased it as a lot of us are spending an hour a day on something controlled by machine learning recommendations, and never thought about it that way, but holds very true for many of us. Thank you so much for joining us today. Where can everyone find you or your work online?
Yeah, so you can, my website is shalalehrismani.com. I really encourage you to also check out what Open Roboethics Institute is doing at openroboethics.org. I am active on, Instagram, Twitter, so these social media platforms. So I am definitely a user of these more conventional ones for some reasons. And I guess yeah, I mean, I'm happy to chat with people, but probably the best way would be through my website or through Ori.
Yeah, awesome. To wrap up, thank you everyone for listening or watching. The series is created by FairBytes. You can find more about FairBytes at fairbytes.org and follow at FairBytes on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook.